Good morning, and welcome to this week's episode of Purely OCD. We're coming at you at a different time than we usually do.
Yeah, and it's been a while. Been a really busy summer.
Yeah,
So we're glad to be back.
we are very glad to be back. And today we're going to be talking about recovery from contamination OCD because the last time that we met, we were talking specifically about compulsions within contamination OCD. So just
Yeah.
following our guidelines as we do.
Yes. Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Yeah. So the part 3 of the podcast, we talk about exposure and response prevention and what that looks like. So in terms of contamination stuff, Miss Lauren.
Yes, Miss Kelley.
Yeah. Why don't you give us an example of how an exposure might look for, let's say, like a germ contamination?
Yeah, so if you have anxiety about germs, about being contaminated by germs, the likelihood is that you perform washing compulsions. Now, you might not. There are lots of different kinds, but let's just say, for sake of argument, that you do. The response prevention part of this equation involves limiting the amount of time that you are washing your hands after coming into contact with some sort of contaminant. I'm using quotation marks for anyone who's not watching but listening.
Right.
So essentially, what we would do is say, okay, let's get you in contact with the contaminant, the thing that is causing you anxiety. Let's say, for example, it's I don't know, like I'm actually thinking more of a red dot. Red dot somewhere might, and I suppose it's not a germ, well, a virus, whatever.
Right. So like HIV, any type of blood-borne disease.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So, but I was thinking about HIV. So if somebody has specifically fears that they're going to contract HIV after touching something, we would have them touch the thing that they believe to be contaminated and to refrain from washing or to limit washing. Ultimately the goal is to refrain entirely so that you don't have to wash your hands every time you touch something that looks like it has red on it, for example. Like I said earlier, that's oftentimes a trigger for people because of blood. But sometimes we do it gradually too, because just stopping washing altogether can be really challenging for folks. So
I love that you said that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the reducing is a great scaffolding for that. It can also look like, not using 2 pumps, but 1 pump of soap, and then eventually no soap, and then eventually no washing.
Yep.
At all.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think to that end, sometimes if you have a very elaborate ritual related to washing, like you're washing in a certain pattern, or
that too, yes,
you're trying to get under the fingernails and between the fingers and like whatever, the
and 3 times
are endless, but just messing up the ritual or reducing the ritual, right? I think it's really important that it doesn't have to be all or none, that this is a very difficult undertaking. And also that we're not necessarily going to start with touching that thing.
That's right? So true. Yep. Absolutely.
Maybe we come in close contact with the thing. Maybe you often talk about like a contamination towel, right? Like you might touch a towel to the thing and then touch the towel. We're just looking to move in a direction like toward the fear rather than away from, and to resist engaging these behaviors that keep our lives so limited.
Yeah, it's the cross-contamination is key at the end of the day, right? We for folks with this particular subtype, They might be concerned maybe less about their body over time being contaminated and much more about these quote unquote clean areas of their home. So it might be a lot of times, and I don't know in your experience as well, but the bed is a good area that's usually that people want to keep clean.
Yes.
So we might have clients do an exposure where they're touching something. Again, we're not doing this out of the gates, so please do not be alarmed. And then avoid exposures. But it might be we touch the thing and then we spread it throughout the house, in the car, on your purse, in the pillows, in the kitchen, the living room, your kid's room, baby's body, whatever.
Yes. One other thing I want to note here, just like with any of the subtypes, is that we are making the choice to do exposures that we believe make rational sense to do.
Right.
So
functional exposure.
Functional exposure. What a great way of putting it. And that it's not as though you should never wash your hands. Like, that's not the idea behind response prevention. It's much more flexible, and we're looking to limit hand washing to your best guess at what is reasonable.
Yes. Yep.
Sometimes that might look like doing a little bit more than what the average person would do, and sometimes that'll look like doing a little less, and sort of vacillating between the two and trying to find that middle ground, but all within the context of what is deemed reasonable by you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. What other contamination subtypes? I'm trying to think of what we had brought up in the last 2 episodes.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because it goes beyond germs and STDs.
Yes. Before we go there, if I may quickly caveat that the beauty is, if you're watching this and you don't hear what we're saying, or you're listening to this, you don't hear what you're saying, you don't hear what you're looking to hear, right? Like you're like, well, my subtype wasn't talked about. We may have talked about it before, and if we did, you can go back to the last episodes, and anything that's a trigger that we talk about is in fact an exposure. So facing that trigger on purpose is an exposure, and the response prevention is holding back on the compulsion. So just seemed like it could be helpful to note that.
It's very helpful. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Because we may not cover everything, especially given the time that it's been since we last spoke. But what other types of contamination do we see?
I was also just going to add.
Oh, please add. Yes.
Is that a lot of times clients are very apprehensive, or maybe they forget because they're having a good day, or they're just like, well, I'll deal with that in the moment, right? I'll not do the compulsions. But the reality is if we go out and intentionally, like you just said, which is what triggered that in my mind, is like, if we intentionally go after the thing that scares us, we're in so much of a better position on offense than we are when we're already in defense. And these exposures that come at us initially anyways, because in the long game, we want to be able to handle those regardless, but especially initially.
Yeah, it's really empowering.
Very. And you have a mindset of, well, I'm going to feel anxious anyways, so we'll do it on my terms.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree, and reminds me of the exposure mindset presentation that we did all those years ago at IOCDF. And you can, I guess, elaborating on what Kelley's saying there, is that you can actually do that with exposures that are more incidental, that are coming up in your day-to-day life, that you can see them and turn toward them, even if they weren't intentional, because obviously things are going to come up that are unplanned.
Yes. So other versions of contamination.
Yeah. So when we obviously there are different substances as well. I know Kelley and I have consulted about people who are anxious regarding contamination with different substances. So,
Yes.
asbestos or
Lead.
lead, chemicals in different cleaners, household cleaners, perhaps. So, um,
I
that's
mean, I've definitely that's a solid one for me.
yeah, yeah. Like it's gonna, well, and it's interesting again, as we talk about probably ad nauseum, that they all overlap because I think that it also then gets into harm, right? The especially with the chemicals, but the general germ contamination can too, and we saw that a lot with COVID.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So obviously, like different substances related to chemicals or things that might be in the house.
Yeah. So people will, if that's one of their variations of contamination, they might avoid cleaning. That's a big one that we see. So their exposure would be then to clean. And a lot of times they've avoided cleaning for so long that they forget almost how much and how do I, or they've avoided it altogether. And in which cases you see someone who it's like the stereotypical OCD is it's so off, right? Like you see people who are not showering because they're trying to avoid getting stuck in the shower, or their house is, actually very dirty and it's because they're avoiding cleaning.
Yeah.
So we're going to have them clean.
Yeah. It is funny that I'm so glad that you brought that up. And again, I think that really, I've seen that related to harm with not only with family members, but also with pets. I mean, not that pets aren't family members, but
No, absolutely.
especially because they are more inclined to lick surfaces or lick
So are toddlers and babies.
well,
Yeah.
that's true.
Right in the mouth.
I can confirm this. Constant.
Yeah.
I just this morning had to tell Elle to get a eucalyptus leaf out of her mouth.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not where that goes. In fact,
She
apparently
thought she was a koala is what happened.
she was thinking she was a koala. She was just vibing, living her best koala life.
Right.
But actually those are not, there's not poisonous, but they're, well, somewhat toxic, I suppose.
Oh, good.
Humans. So I was like, that needs to come out of your mouth. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's not. Nope.
But somebody who had a fear around that, an unreasonable fear. Yeah, absolutely. You might then have your child hold that or put it near their face.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Or allow them to be out in the garden with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that as a functional exposure. I personally love gardening. So that would certainly be a way of supporting me and getting back into life. And also would bring this, this potential of like, maybe your child is going to touch something. And then after touching it.
Oh, no, they will. They always will.
Well, they'll touch something. Maybe they'll touch something that's toxic.
Right. Yeah.
And look, I'm not suggesting if you have a young child and you don't want to have toxic plants in your, in your garden, then fine, right? Like I get that too. It's just how much, right? Like it's difficult to draw that line.
You don't, the thing is there's only, the line is when it becomes too excessive, right? And problematic for that individual. So, but also going along the lines of chemical contamination with children and pets, the exposure would or may look like you're going to clean the surface and then allow them to touch it. So.
Yeah. Yep. Without then like excessively washing it with like water afterward, or you know what I mean? Like I think OCD can be just so tricky, and the desire for absolute certainty is so, but perhaps that's an initial foray into exposure is like, okay, we're going to touch it and we're going to wait 2 minutes, or we're going to wash it and we're going to clean it, rather, I should say. And then we're not going to follow up by rinsing it and then wait for 2 minutes, and, that, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Somebody was saying in the comments, I'm still really anxious around chemicals. It's hard to clean. I used to be scared of all contamination, but have improved greatly. I'm
That's
so glad
awesome. Yeah.
that you've improved greatly. That's wonderful. And yeah, chemicals can be scary. And then, of course, there are all of these really fun labels everywhere. They're like,
Oh, I know. What's the Proposition 34 or something?
oh, yeah,
California residents. I'm like, doesn't it cause cancer well, anyways, that's a whole nother thing. The causing cancer.
Being alive.
Yeah.
Has a tendency to sometimes result in cancer. But yeah, no, that proposition is everywhere. And if you live in the state of California, and you have
you get the warning.
Yeah, every time. It's like,
every time.
Don't forget. It's a built-in exposure, really.
Yeah, I mean, we have an ice maker, and I'm pretty anxious around all of this stuff. And it wasn't until about a year in that I realized on the side it had a huge swear. I'm sorry I did not inform you. I should have taken a photo. And my initial reaction was, oh, really? I can't. I've been giving my child this. I've been ingesting it. The thing is, cancer is everywhere, and that's a very real thing, right? And is it coming from chemicals? Is it in our soil? I don't know, but I still need. I'd like to have this ice.
Yeah.
And ice makers aren't cheap, so I'd like to keep this. And it's, I'm going to take the risk. Now, not everybody that's going to work out for them. Maybe they'd prefer a different ice maker, and we might negotiate that in therapy.
But I think it's a really good point that some amount of a substance, it has to be okay to ingest.
Oh yeah, well, right? The compromise would be you're going to eat a cup of ice.
Right.
And then you can return it.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think, and maybe they don't. Maybe
true. It depends.
But the ultimate reality is that, to your point, there are carcinogens everywhere, and that's a scary reality.
Yep.
But also keep in mind that, like, the sun is, I don't know if it's technically listed as a carcinogen, but it is, it is
causing cancer.
It is something that can lead to cancer. And so are we never going to go outside? Are we, going to cover up our whole bodies? Probably not. Probably we'll put on some sunscreen and, or, take precautions, wear a hat, depending on our skin, sort of color and our predisposition. Like, I have very fair skin, and I have, my mother's constantly getting things removed because of the potential for them to become cancerous, or like early stages of cancerous. So again, like, it's none of this is a replacement for therapy, because everyone is so individual, and at the same token, understanding that there's got to be some allowance for these things. And I say that too, just because I want people to understand that I'm not saying this callously, or like, well, you just got to get over it.
No, yeah, I know.
I mean, we all live with the cancer thing. And also, I say this within the realm of contamination with drugs and alcohol, right?
Yes.
Which is something that I struggled with historically, is there has to be some level of molecules of a substance that it's okay to ingest. Otherwise, like, I won't live my life.
Mouthwash.
Right.
Maybe that would help other people because they're avoiding mouthwash.
Right.
Or concerts because they smell marijuana.
Right. Absolutely. Or I think about it, my husband drinks and I don't. And sometimes I will be washing the dishes and I'll have like dumped out something and I'll use the wand on his cup, and that's like, okay, well this wand is now contaminated. And there was a
Yeah.
point in time where I would have used different ones, or like
Sure. Yeah, I
had
could
a
see that.
touching it. So there has to be some degree of that, right? Like obviously, are there molecules of alcohol that then somehow may make it into um, other glasses and dishware and all of that? Sure. And I have to accept that that's part of the world.
Yeah, it really is. It's a functional exposure too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Which again, we love.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't remember if we talked about, and maybe this is a totally different topic because it requires its own 3-parter, would be the contamination of personalities.
yeah, like emotional contamination.
Yeah, probably its own thing.
Yeah, maybe. Although we can certainly nod to it here if you want to.
Right. So the concept of emotional contamination would be the fear around contracting somebody's personality, let's say. Well, there's different variations, but that's the broad stroke of it. It might be my brother's has schizophrenia, and I don't want to be around them because what if I take on their traits?
Yep. Yep. So it could be I'm going to catch a personality. I'm going to catch a disorder.
A disorder. I might get, you see that with OCD a lot of like a group, right? I don't want to join group because what if I then now have this incepted idea of somebody else's OCD and then I get that subtype.
Right. Totally. Yeah. So, and I think that also, we see it with, if you feel something while in contact with like an article of clothing or what have you, that sometimes people will want to wash that article of clothing because now it's contaminated with their emotion, and also sometimes the memories associated with that emotion. So like, let's say you get angry at your partner and you're wearing a sweater, you might then say, oh, I have to take this off and wash it so that it's
or
clear.
throw it away.
Or throw it away. Yeah. And you can see where this could become very, very expensive.
Yeah.
So the exposure and response prevention element here would be, I'm not suggesting that you pick a fight with your spouse.
No, but fights happen.
But fights happen. So this is where relying on incidental exposures is important. And then doing the response prevention of saying like, okay, I'm gonna hold on to this. Or maybe just having a negative or bad thought about a partner.
Or if clients aren't ready sometimes, and I forgot this in general across the board with contamination stuff, is that I will tell people, whatever you do, just don't throw it away. Wait till our next session at least. Like maybe put it in a bag. I don't care if that's compulsive, but then we're going to bring it out and we're going to do, if you're willing, do an exposure around it.
Yeah.
Together.
But it gives us the opportunity to do
it does
around it. Whereas
and if they decide not, they go, okay, I'm going to wash it. All right. But at least we've talked through it a little bit and you've had a moment to let your prefrontal cortex kind of come online. And
we need that guy, man. He's important.
He really is. Yeah.
He's got a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Although I wish you'd come on more.
Yeah. That mammalian brain. It really likes to get active.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, any other thoughts? I mean, obviously we could go on about this forever.
Yeah.
But again, because you trigger yourself on purpose and then you refrain slowly but surely, you learn to refrain from doing doing the things that are intended to, quote, keep you safe.
Yes, absolutely.
They're not keeping you safe. They're
They're
ruining your life.
they're limiting your life and taking things away from you. So
Yeah.
it's a lie.
Yeah, it is a lie. And like the degree of safety that it's imparting to you is certainly not worth the amount of cost
Yep,
that you're incurring as a result. So
absolutely.
so I guess we need some new ideas for our next topic.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anyone has a well-known subtype that we haven't covered of late that you'd like us to consider for our next, you can go in and comment on our website words.
Website or on Instagram.
Sure. Yeah, we're
Wherever.
happy to roll with suggestions, but one way or another, we look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. The date may be in flux, so keep with our Instagram for updates on that.
Yep.